Hi, I'm Craig Mowrey, one of the lead pastors here at Walnut Hill. I want to welcome you to Conversations. Real topics, real people, real conversations. And tonight, you're going to see a pre-recorded conversation that I had with Stephanie Clark. She's the CEO of Amirs Ministries, which is also one of our Church in Action mission partnerships. And you're in for a treat. Stephanie's going to share some of the incredible testimonies of the ministry that she's involved in that ministers to women coming out of sex trafficking and gives them a rehabilitation experience and also an invitation into Jesus Christ. So I hope you'll enjoy Conversations. Yeah, Stephanie, you live in a glorious part of New England.
I've heard, yeah.
How long have you been in New Hampshire?
We moved in August, and as you can tell, I'm not from here originally, guys. I'm from Michigan, so any Michiganders know?
Okay. How will we have told? Just you think
just
you have an
sorry,
accent or something?
and you know,
oh,
yeah,
sorry,
right, yeah.
sorry, yes.
Yeah. So,
that could be Canada. It could be anything.
When I visit Canada, I do kind of feel
you
very.
You fit right in.
Yeah. And then they apologize to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, this isn't right. So
stop apologizing.
Yeah.
Well, it's so good to have you here, Stephanie. John introduced you and a little bit of what you do, but tell us a little bit about your family and also a little bit about Amirah. What is Amirah? How would you describe it, and what role do you play in that organization?
Great. Well, so they call me the CEO, which feels weird.
But it is true.
It is true. So that's my day job. The reality is I've been in this work now for almost 6 years, and 6 years ago it was just me. This was a hope and a dream by a group of people that are the board of directors, and really it was God's faithfulness in how this all came about. And so that's 6 years ago. We just had this one little safe home. It wasn't open. We launched it out, and now we are working on launching their second safe home, the first one in the state of Connecticut. We're launching a community resource center next year because of COVID, and we've realized we can do this. We can put something right in Lynn, Massachusetts, the heart of a great amount of trafficking and exploitation. We have several survivors now on staff.
That's
this
amazing.
year, I'm so amazed to say we've actually hired on an Amir and a graduate.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and that deserves a round of applause, guys.
Yes,
I'm just going to say that right now. So.
Well, maybe it'd be worth explaining to our group here tonight kind of what that means to you, as a graduate being hired on as a staff.
It's huge. So what Amirah does, we provide refuge spaces for survivors of sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, prostitution, you name it. This is what we work with, right? And we do that really through residential places of refuge. So a safe home where they come and they receive whole person care. It's long-term, it's trauma-informed, and the whole home is filled with just the love of Jesus. Yeah. And I get asked all the time, because I'm in New England, so either I'm too Christian or I'm not Christian enough. So I'm from Michigan, guys, just be really nice, okay? But the reality is I'm not going to force my faith on these women. They've been forced to do way too much. I need to model Jesus and love them like Jesus said. Yes. And that is love they've never experienced. And so the whole mission of Amirah is wrapped up in John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, than one lay down his life for his friends. Yeah. And so we do that day in and day out. And you would be amazed at the questions we get asked from that, which then opens up great conversations where we're able to talk to them about, there is a God out there that loves you that much. And he's just waiting for you to understand that and believe in it.
I can just imagine here you have women who have been exploited, perhaps even their whole life potentially, and you're coming in and demonstrating love that they've never seen.
Yeah.
Of course, they're going to ask where that's coming from.
Exactly. And it's the more that you understand about exploitation, there's so many myths and stuff out there, but a lot of times it's somebody that they knew and loved. It could be a family member that was exploiting them. And so just imagine that, this is your parents and this is what they're doing to you. And they tell you their whole life they love you. That's so twisted.
Absolutely.
So Jesus is the only way that's going to get untwisted.
It's incredible. So. How did you know, Stephanie, that this was a calling on your life? And in a moment, we'll get to kind of the impact on your family, because I asked a question about family, but we'll get to that in a moment. But how did you know personally that this was a calling on your life and this was what you were meant to step into? Because what I've seen in you, and we've been together just a few times, is that you are passionate about what you're doing. And you only can be passionate about what you're doing, I think, when you feel very called to it. And it's clear you're called.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. That's always weird. I have a friend that says like, you know your calling like in hindsight, right? And so sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's a really clear like God smacking you upside the head saying, go do that thing, right? Yeah. And so for me, I was a pastor before I was this. And so I was an associate pastor in the North Shore of Boston, loved, being a pastor. And before 2020, I would have said being a pastor is a comfortable job. Now, I'm not so sure.
I don't think I've ever said that.
Well, it's hard
where
work.
did you do ministry? Can I get a job there?
Yeah. It is hard work. It is hard work, but it's like I knew my paycheck was coming in. Yeah. I knew
right.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah.
That whole sense of like
there's security. There was some security there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now though, 2020, I'm like, oh my goodness, I pray for pastors more than ever.
Thank you.
So yeah, but I think. I came to a point in my ministry there where I had to wrestle with what am I called to do?
Yeah.
And for a number of years, God had put in my heart sex trafficking. He had done a few things in my life. And part of how that happened was because of my childhood, my story. I'm not a survivor. I was not exploited as a kid, but my father was a buyer, a John. And so he was, aside from being doing that, he was also a pastor himself. And so this is, I know it's like, oh, good grief. That's actually kind of common, unfortunately. Yeah. Your average John is a 40-year-old white man with 2 kids at home. I was talking to somebody today about legislation. And I'm like, yeah, we've attempted to get a bill passed in Massachusetts 3 times. It passes through the Senate every time and dies in the House. And we know it's dying there because there's like 50 buyers just sitting in the House.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But that was my life, was knowing my dad does this.
Yes.
And knowing on Sunday morning he does this. And having to live with that hypocrisy and having to live with that like unbelievable anger for so many years, right? And so thankfully, I mean, God transformed my life. He transformed my father's life. My dad is a totally changed man, repented, wonderful. I'm happy to call him my father. But my childhood was terrible in a nutshell. Yeah. And so I think the amazing thing that God is doing is redeeming that childhood. Because for so many years I hated, and I don't use that word lightly, but I hated the women my dad would go see. And now I'm serving them. And loving them. And that's only God. That's only God.
We could dive in deeper to that. We're not going to do that today, but I appreciate so much that your willingness to be vulnerable on that topic. It's just every time I hear you share this, it blows my mind that you are willing to do that, and it helps us to understand, how God uses hurt and pain, and then He can, years later, use that for His glory. It's incredible how He does that. In the moment, it's really hard to see that could ever happen. Right. But then He does it, and He does that over and over again. And I think we probably all could testify to that in our own lives.
Absolutely.
So, which kind of moves us into the next question I wanted to ask you, just about the impact of the ministry on you and your family. What does that look like for you as you've stepped into something very challenging? I mean, this is not the job that most people grow up thinking, oh, I'm gonna take care of people who have gone through sex trafficking. No, this is unusual. So how has that unusual experience impacted you all?
Yeah, I mean, well, so personally, anytime I introduce myself, like before when I was a pastor, I would introduce myself to somebody in New England and they would walk away because they don't want to talk to pastors, right? And now...
Is that like that in Michigan too, or just around? Okay,
come on, there's a church in every corner in Michigan, right? And they're all like packed with like 10,000 people. It's ridiculous. Yeah. I don't even know how. There's not that many farmers. I don't get it.
But, where'd they come from?
I don't know. But now, like, I introduce myself to people, and they're like, oh, what do you do? And I always say, oh, I run a nonprofit. Because I don't necessarily want to open this up for them, because this is a lot. And then they're like, well, tell me what it is. And I'm like, oh, so I work with survivors of sex trafficking. And they're like, huh. Yeah. I'm like, okay, I've just traumatized this poor individual.
And they don't know the next question they should ask, right?
Yeah. So that in and of itself is difficult, right, to manage. My husband, he's my rock. He's way better than I am. So if you like me, you'll love Dave. But he's been supportive from day one. So when I was a pastor, and I was wrestling with this calling. I told him that I just said, God, Dave, I don't think I'm called to be a pastor. I think I'm called to do this whole sex trafficking thing. And he said, I've been praying about this for a month. I wholeheartedly agree. And so that was like one of the top 5 God moments in our life, right, in our marriage.
Yeah, go back to that one over and over again.
And he's been supportive, from day one of our relationship on what do you want to do, and helping to just, be that rock for my life, which is awesome. Our first Thanksgiving for when the Amirah Safe Home opened in the North Shore of Boston, Dave and I spent in the safe home together with a couple of women. And it was one of the best Thanksgivings we've ever had. Because, we're with these 2 amazing women. We had just opened the home, so we had 2 amazing women in the home. We had cooked steak, because I said, do you want turkey or steak? And they're like, steak, please. I'm like, yes. So we cooked steak. We had all this stuff, and we were sitting down and getting everything prepared. And one of the women looked at the other woman and was like, can you remember the last time you had a Thanksgiving meal that wasn't in a shelter or wasn't? And she's like, no. And Dave and I just had to take a moment and be like, don't cry.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
This is supposed to be a happy time.
Yeah, we're okay. But that is just a wonderful thing to do together. Since we opened the home and all that, Dave and I adopted 2 girls. So we have an 11 and 12-year-old adopted through DCF in Massachusetts. Now they live with us, obviously, in New Hampshire. So we adopted pre-teenagers. So these, I'm naming several things you guys can pray for us about, just so you know.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like instant parenting of, hormonal little girls.
Yes.
So they're awesome.
Are they sisters?
They are sisters, Mathia and Nevaeh. And Nevaeh will tell you all the time that's heaven spelled backwards. So she's super fond of that.
Yes.
On Mother's Day a couple of years ago, the school had them write out what does your mom do? And Nevaeh wrote out, my mom saves women. And I'm like, well, that's not true. But
Jesus
does. I do not, and I do not use that terminology whatsoever. But in her brain, that's what I get to do at Amirah. And they're always intrigued. They love to ask questions. I think, Mathia, she goes through spurts every few months of, maybe I could work at Amirah, Mom. I'm like, I'm not hiring, honey. But yeah, sure.
Not yet.
Not yet, yeah. But this is something that they're both really intrigued by.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So it's a family endeavor now. As you started it with a dream, and what does it look like now? What's how's it growing? How is Amirah growing right now?
Yeah. So as I said, 6 years ago, it was just me, right? Which is scary. We opened up the home and did it slowly, made sure things were going right. A few years into that, we got to meet John and Charles, and they saw the fruit of just doing this well. And we partnered with the Anthem Ground, and now we're opening up this home here. Aside from that, we've been able to hire on a couple of survivors who are doing mentoring and outreach. We're in jails and prisons. We were in jails and prisons before COVID. We're slowly but surely getting back into that. We're starting to launch a community resource center where we're going to be able to meet women right where they're at, with kids, with anything. They might still be in the life, but we can offer them,
You can start to bring the resources around them and help
support
them.
right there. So, 6 years ago, our organization was about $200,000 was our budget. Next year, it's going to be 1.1 million. That is God.
It's
that
incredible.
is such an amazing God thing. And you guys have been a huge part of that. And so I just want to say thank you.
It's been a privilege to be a part of it. My hope and prayer is that we'll be able to be a part of it more in the future. It's exciting. When you talk about, a survivor becoming a staff member, that elicits in my mind the stories that you must have to tell. And I want to just ask you to maybe share a story that maybe encapsulates why you do this, why this ministry is so important, not just to you, but why it should probably be important to us too.
I think I call it bringing a pocket of heaven to earth, right? And we don't get heaven now, but man, we get a chance to see heaven in little glimpses, right? So we were chatting earlier about hiking Mount Washington. So every year we do a fundraiser where we ask people to go hike Mount Washington, because why not? It's totally fun.
It can be done.
It can be done. It came about because of my husband, actually. So he's a mountaineer. He's done Rainier and wants to do Denali, and he's crazy. But he was like, I really think we need to hike Mount Washington regularly for the women of Amirah. And so I think it was year 3. We had a couple women in the safe home that were like, we want to hike this thing. I'm like, okay, great. I will come pick you up at 4 a.m. We will head on up to, North Conway and you guys can sleep in the car.
Well, I thought you were going to say you did like a year's worth of training. No, you're saying you just put them in a car and brought them to Mount Washington.
Yeah, totally fine. So we get to the base, what was it called? Tuckerman's Notch or whatever, the base, right? And I was not hiking that year. I had hiked the year previous. That was enough for me. I was just going to go
Done it.
greet the
Check.
crowds, be the face.
Be the CEO.
And sit and read a book while they hiked and then greet them again when they came down 8 hours later, right?
I thought you were going to say you're going to start hiking with them, hide in the woods, and then when they came down, finish with them.
Yeah, hey, there you go.
Oh, I guess that doesn't really go along with
it was
the model.
not going to work like that. So I was getting the backpacks ready of the 2 survivors that were going, and I was like loading them up with snacks. And this one woman, I'll call her Molly, she was like, wait, what are you doing? And I'm like, Molly, you're about to go hike for like 8 hours. She's like, 8 hours? What am I doing? And I'm like, do you not realize this thing is 6,288 feet? Come on.
That's the moment where you're like, I maybe should have explained this a little better.
No, it was really, really funny. So they hiked the mountain. There was a few volunteers that they had known and it was amazing. Here's these 2 women, that, obviously had not trained for this thing whatsoever. Have all sorts of things that they're working on and dealing with. They hiked up the mountain. They made it to the top. It was awesome.
It's great.
Then Dave and I are driving them back home, right? And I figured, okay, they're going to be conked out.
Or they're going to be mad at you.
One of the 2 things.
Or both.
Or both. Just sleep mad, all that. But they weren't. They were so jazzed. They were like, yes, and we were talking. And the thing that had been happening, so in the car was this woman, Molly, and then Jessie, who actually is the woman that we hired, right? And so Jessie, the year previous, had already been saved, and we had done this wonderful experience with her around that. And so we were in the car, and previous to this trip, Molly had asked us for a Bible, and we gladly give them Bibles. We have a partnership with Christian Book. They will give them Bibles with their names engraved on it. It's wonderful and beautiful and all that. And Molly had read, and I'm not even joking, like 75% of the Bible in the course of a month.
It's incredible.
And not only had she read it, but she came to me saying like, so in Isaiah it says this, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, uh-huh.
So you're still a pastor.
Yeah, but it was like she remembered like what she was reading. And I'm like, look, I like read the Bible in a month on a dare one time. This is not something people do. Like clearly something's going on.
Yeah.
And so she had that leading up to this hike. And so we're in the car and they're talking and then finally she goes, so Steph, how do I know when I'm ready to be saved? And I'm like, well, okay, if you're asking the question.
Good chance.
There, maybe. And so then Jessie was like, so come to me to church tomorrow. When the pastor says, raise your hand, you come down, like, you got this.
Done.
That's how it's done. I'm like, yes, you can totally do that. Or we can just, pray right here and this'll be fine. And, and so Dave just like kind of nudged me and he's like, why don't you pull over? And we happened to be at my favorite spot in New Hampshire, which is this like mountain and there's this lake and it's God's glory right there. And so we prayed with Molly and she was saved.
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. And now she's a graduate. She graduated this year in the midst of a pandemic. She works at a hospital. Wow. She is one of these people, I do not know the title, but after surgery, she gets to go in and cleans up all the instruments and everything. Here's this woman who was a felon, who has years of trauma, who is dealing with addiction recovery, and she has this amazing job, and she has a pathway to recovery, and she watches her church online every week, and she's just like, it's God.
That's great.
It's
I love
totally
it.
God.
Yeah. It's exciting to see that, man. You get to see that transformation, that journey that is just so powerful.
Yeah.
Now, Stephanie, I want to just kind of close with, you know that we're in this season this year talking about on the other side of yes. As we kind of close our time together, what would you want to say to us when it comes to, on the other side of the yes, how the Lord moves mountains? What would you want to encourage us to be considering, to be praying, to be taking that kind of a risk? Anything that comes to your mind?
I think
as a church, this is a church that supports you.
Yeah, I think the thing is, like for me, is the idea of fear just needs to go away. And there is so much so much truth in that. Like, you know, what can man do to me? There's nothing that can be done. Like, God is for me. Who can be against me?
Yeah.
And so even like, I mean, I say like being a pastor is hard, but it was comfortable. And I had to step out of that and do this thing where I was the only staff member. I knew nothing. I knew no one. And okay. And, you know, take that risk and take that plunge. But even in all of that, nothing felt like I was taking a risk or taking a plunge.
Yeah.
Because saying yes just felt like, okay, yeah, God's with me. You just start walking.
Yeah.
And so I would say, like, there's so much fear and anxiety so often with, well, God's calling me to move this mountain, and oh my goodness, and like, or even move this pebble, oh my goodness, you know. Either way, God's calling you to do that. There is nothing you have to be afraid of.
Yeah.
And so just take fear off the table completely and just start walking forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of heard you say, if I were to put up my own words, that the calling isn't just he gives you this clear picture and you go. It's almost like in motion. We've been talking a little bit about, you know, you say yes, but you kind of do that in motion. It's one step at a time. And I mean, you wouldn't have expected to be where you are today 10 years ago. I mean, this is, you now looking back, you see how God called and how he provided. Is that kind of, is that some accurate
totally
way to say it?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't know how old I am right now. Like almost 20 years ago, I was planning to be like a single woman missionary in Libya, you know, and then I met Dave, and that's, you know, gone now. But but it's just a process with God. Like he unveils this stuff bit by bit, and as you say yes, there's pure joy, guys, pure joy.
I think the thing that we sometimes feel when we listen to a story like yours, Stephanie, is I could never do that. You know, I could never say yes in that way. But I really appreciate how you've shared with us that it's not an all at once kind of situation. You know, you can look back and see where you said yes to something small that led to where you are today. I just think that's a really important message for us to consider. You know, what is the small step that he's calling us to take today? Or perhaps the big one. I mean, sometimes there's big ones too, but to remove that fear of failure, of man, or whatever is out there that keeps us from taking those steps. That's a great word for us to consider. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Is there anything else that well, actually, no, this is a good question to ask, I think. How can we pray for you?
Thanks, yeah.
If I hadn't asked that question, John would have really been unhappy with me today. Now, how can we pray for you? And I know this group right here that's with us now is a group that gives to missions, prays for local missions and missions around the world. So this is a great group to share with.
Yeah.
And every year we put together a prayer guide. And one of our challenges to this group and to our whole church was, would you pray through that prayer guide once a week throughout the course of the year? Now, I have to admit, I didn't do it perfectly, but I did it this year, and it was so rewarding to pray through that prayer guide because I'm praying through all the partners that we have, all the connections that we have. So when we ask you, how can we pray for you? I want you to know this is a church that prays.
Yeah.
So, lay it on us.
I will do that. No worries. I mean, I know that people that show up to hear me speak are committed anyways, because anytime you see sex trafficking, who's going to show up? So you guys are the real people. I get it.
I don't know if we may not have advertised it that way. I don't know. I think we advertise as dessert.
Dessert. Yeah. Usually when I do something and it's like human trafficking 101, I bring chocolate chip
You got to bring food. Yeah.
Yeah. Here you go. Have some chocolate. It's going to be totally fine. So prayer for Amirah at large. As I just said, we've gone from a $200,000 organization to a $1.1 million organization.
In how much time is that now?
Less than 6 years.
Yeah. That's growth.
It's a huge God miracle, right? And it's amazing to see. I think my biggest prayer for Amirah is I want to see more lives changed. I want to see more lives transformed. I want to see more survivors be empowered and given the platform and called into whatever God is calling them to do. I'm like, I want to hire as many survivors as I can. It's all God. So that's my huge prayer,
Yes.
is just that God continues to unfold his amazing will
Well,
for
I think
us.
you've painted that picture for us so well tonight, so I really appreciate that. How can we, as a church, be of any help to you?
Well, one, continue to give.
Yep.
Yeah. We're going to open up our safe home, so if you want to come volunteer, come volunteer.
Excellent.
You
We've
have
had some
to-
folks volunteer already to...
Yes, to help us renovate, which is amazing.
And so there's opportunity coming up as well.
Yep, to
Great.
volunteer on a regular basis when the home opens. You can be a part of the
Excellent.
women's lives and love them. You just need to be normal and love them.
Well,
Number one is a self-check, guys. It's up to you. Okay?
look in the mirror and say,
Yep.
am I normal?
Am I normal?
That might eliminate a few of us.
That's okay.
Okay.
We want to eliminate
Stay home.
that. Yep.
Then
yep.
we'll just stay home.
Totally fine.
But we'll keep giving, though.
That's totally fine too. Yeah. But yeah, and then prayer. For us, it's all about prayer. This is when I say this is the darkest stuff I've ever had to deal with. It's the darkest stuff I've ever had to deal with.
Yeah.
This is evil that I've never even imagined. So this is what
Like
we're up
hard
against.
to believe kind of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. I was telling John, we did an intake interview with a woman, and they were describing the ring, where her traffickers bring. And so she's from upstate Vermont, and she gets trafficked down into Burlington, and then to Lebanon, and then to Concord, and then up to Plymouth. My home is near Plymouth, and then she gets to go back to Vermont, right? This is their ring. The travel from Plymouth to Vermont, you have to go by my house. And so when I learned that, and I'm like, okay, I can't escape this. This is everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's just, this is the evil that we face, and we need Jesus every day.
Yeah.
So
Stephanie, thank you so much.
Thanks.
It's so great to have you here. I really appreciate you coming down.
Now you've just heard from one of our Church in Action partners, Stephanie Clark, and she represents over 20 partnerships that we have around the world through Church in Action. I want to challenge you in this season to pray and consider what you might give over the next 5 months from November into March 2021. We really want to see the opportunity to witness to and impact people around the world. We want to see that grow at Walnut Hill. I don't know if you know this, but we serve ministries that serve over 5 million people every single year. I hope that you want to be a part of this great ministry. So, 5-month commitment. Will you get involved with Church in Action? I hope so. God bless you, and thanks so much for watching.